know I'm between your time now and lunch, so I will make sure that you get your lunch on time. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Nick, for that question that will lead on to this particular session. So I think this is a topic that's been in interest of many because, like most of you have said, this is Iskandar again and again and again. And will this dream materialize this time around? Let's hear from our three panelists today. So to kickstart the session, I think the big problem statement is we've always wanted Iskandar Malaysia to be a promised land, to be the mini Shenzhen and of Malaysia as well as Southeast Asia. And over the years, this promise hasn't really been fulfilled. What are we facing now? Is this dream becoming a reality? Will it become a real reality this time around with all the factors that we've been discussing from the morning till now? So let's start with basically the first question, which I'll pose to Natazha. Iskandar Malaysia was once touted as the next big thing, yet many would argue that it hasn't lived up to the hype. In this case, now we have the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone. What makes you confident that this time around it will be different?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Solin. Iskandar Malaysia has created 18 years ago, back in 2006. It has laid a strong foundation for economic growth and development. And with all the ambitious project, it has faced its challenges. Now with the introduction of Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, we believe this is a new opportunity to build on that foundation and to drive significant progress. Then I would like to share three key reasons. One is it is a joint effort between two countries and a state. We have a MOU signed early this year, and the definitive agreement scheduled to be signed by end of the year. So within that agreement is an obligation by all the stakeholders. You need to fulfill the obligation. There's no turning back from that on. And number two is we have this idea. It's not an idea. It's already being discussed. We're going to have this IMFC Johor. Now we have IMFC at Maida. Later on, we're going to have a IMFC-J, is Investment Facilitation Center at Johor. It's going to be under one roof for all the federal agencies, state agency, together with the local authority. So this agency, or it's not an agency, is a mechanic to put everyone under one roof, because we have this federal, state, and local authority to be under one roof to streamline all the processes and as an info center for the investor. So that is the thing coming up very soon, early next year. Chief Minister already announced it. The third one that I'm going to share is a few of the discussion before mentioned about regulatory process, the streamlining of the process. Under the Special Economic Zone, the size of IRDA plus Pengerang, we have 6 local authority, namely Bandaraya Johor Bahru, Pasir Gudang, Iskandar Puteri, Kulai, Pontian, and Pengerang. So you can imagine the locality, the nature of the locality is they are very territorial, and then the challenge is to get everyone act together as one team. We're going to streamline the process. The new theme will be speed and clarity for all the 6 local authority. So that will be the thing, the commitment put up by the state government that we foresee going to make the JSSZ, or if you like, the Iskandar 2.0 will succeed. Okay.
Thank you, Natazha. Now to Jezul. We've seen a lot of track records, and this time around, very much mixed track records at Iskandar Malaysia. What do you think are the special reforms or innovations that need to be implemented to ensure this special economic zone this time does not become a missed opportunity for our country?
Thank you. I think, firstly, when the topic of the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone came up, of course, the immediate reaction was, as you said, here we go again. In terms of, are we doing another Iskandar Malaysia? Are we talking about the Shenzhen story and so on? So when the Menteri Besar approached me to say, Zul, come and join us for a visit to Shenzhen in March to understand what their developments had taken place and what were their success stories. One of the key inputs that I shared at that time was, let's not just look at the flashy things that you see today and the numbers that they represent in terms of growth and the achievements that Shenzhen has gone through. But look at the 40 years that they built upon in terms of where they were. There were 4 phases that they went through. Initially looking at one that was capital intensive, into the industrial phase, into another one that then introduced technology. And today, Shenzhen talks everything about innovation. But what was more important, if you go to Shenzhen today, and they have extensive displays and historical data to show that at every step of the way, you have to build on the growth and the developments that had taken place at that point of time before you can go on to getting onto the next phase and the next phase and the phase after that. And similarly, in Iskandar, Malaysia, and today, if you look, and we call it the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, and maybe 10 years from now, it'll be called something else. These represent the phases of growth that we want to bring into Johor as a state, Malaysia as a country. And we have to then look at what we built over the last 18 years, as Natazha mentioned. The conversations that we're having today about data centers, about AI, about efficiency of doing business, we couldn't have done that 18 years ago if we did not start Iskandar, Malaysia. So we have to go through, we told Dato' MB and the rest of the team, look, number one, look at what we've done. Don't disregard the 18 years as a missed opportunity, but look at it as saying that what can we build upon from what we have done. The second principle that we said we wanted to address was, I said, Dato', please don't hit the reset button. Don't start everything as if this is the first time we're doing it, and then we are saying, you know, we're going to establish this, we want to do that, and all of this, without taking into context of what is it that we're going to plan, so that we plan ahead. That, for example, today, initially we were tasked with saying, so let's come up with the outcomes for this Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone. And of course, we had the traditional discussions about looking at GDP growth, looking at job creation, looking at average salaries, household income, and so on. But we told them that maybe the innovation that we need to look at this time is building on what we've had in the past. Why don't we set a target that whatever we develop over the next 5 or 10 years within this Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone should set the foundation for us for the next 50 years. So, for example, having this IMFC, it's not just good enough that we say we have a center, but will it be now setting up the processes, the efficiencies, the technology platforms, so that within the next 5 years, you know, we are up there on par with the world's best in terms of efficiency and ease of doing business. Setting up the infrastructure is not good enough to say that we're just building the RTS and what goes on after that. But how are we setting up the foundation that in the next 5 years, we are ready to say, we are on the global stage, we're ready to go out there and get there. So I think 2 key points that we brought was look at the journey that we have taken and plan ahead so that we set the foundation for the future. Not just what we think we should achieve as an immediate target for the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone. So I'll stop there first.
Thank you, Zul. So I think what you've mentioned was actually very true. I mean, we've spent almost 2 decades in the process of building it to what it is today. Yeah, we might have had some pitfalls and some hiccups along the way, but thankfully, last 2 years, things started to pick up again, and interest basically became something that was really new and fascinating. And to that extent, the question of data centers, a real estate element that we also spoke about this morning. And to you, Paul, you know, this is something that's been very different for us in Malaysia, maybe thankfully for Singapore's moratorium. But given that it's a very competitive landscape in Southeast Asia, what are the compelling reasons that you offer for choosing Iskandar, Malaysia over other emerging markets, you know, for data centers and logistic hubs? Maybe to follow up with that, what are specific elements in the special economic zone that will make Iskandar, Malaysia not just an option, but an obvious and the choice for high-tech infrastructure investments?
Yeah, all very, very good points. And data centers, I noticed some conversations on the previous panels about what data centers mean to communities and employment prospects and things like that. And I think the phrase used this morning was ecosystems, and once or twice, and that's a really good way to put it. And what data centers bring with them to the area, and probably I'll answer your last question first around the special economic zone. I think there is examples. Shenzhen is in Hong Kong is the classic example that you can draw on here. I spent a decade of my life living in Hong Kong. I can speak very, very clearly to the benefits of the special economic zone there, and also what it did for softening that border. And borders are softened for a number of different reasons: people movements, logistics abilities, and products and services, but also things like data. And when you're looking at sovereignty and things like that, which is of great concern to countries in and around the Southeast Asian region in particular, when it comes to their data sovereignty, I think when you have a look at what the SEZ can do moving forward, I think that's very compelling. And I think the time is now, when you talk about third time lucky or here we go again or whatever else. I really do think it's mutually beneficial to both parties now. I do think for the first time in the 3 times, Singapore probably needs this more than ever, particularly when you have a look at the data center and technology space. They simply, from a land mass and availability of power, use of renewables, and a number of different things to do with emissions, they can't compete with some of the workloads that are going on around the region. So that's good. It's good in a way because it's showing the rise of Southeast Asia and other markets. So why Malaysia? Why Johor? I think that's really interesting, in the fact that you talk about the rise of technology. The green shoots in 2022 are in parallel with the development of AI and the growth of that in our societies. And so when you start to look at that, you have to look at proximity to certain things. You have to look at availability of resource, availability of cost-effective real estate solutions and things like that, and also adjacency to other things. And I think when you look at Johor, I think that ticks all of those boxes in abundance. And I think the gentlemen here are promoting the right things when it comes to Johor from a DC perspective. Heavy use of renewables, trying to cut down emissions, innovation around technology. There's a data center and an operation in Johor now, which has got arguably a market-leading use of liquid cooling without a heavy reliance on water, which is quite a feather in the cap globally for that particular organisation and what they're doing there. So I think it just goes to show that when all of those things are at your disposal, then things can be done. In terms of the rest of Southeast Asia, I think the opportunity in Malaysia is, first of all, a supportive environment, supportive government, and a government that's actively trying to do more. And I think that bodes well for the future.
Thank you, Paul. So third time lucky, this is the time, and I must say that we are actually very blessed to be in this part of time for planning. So now, since we really want this dream to materialize and want this dream to come true, let's now talk about some key factors that will drive the success of the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, and focusing on infrastructure, regulatory frameworks, investment opportunities, as well as collaboration between stakeholders. So to Natazha, what do you think are the incentives or support structures that are being put in place? And how do you think these incentives will be structured to avoid attracting only speculative investments? Because the last time we spoke about Iskandar, it was all speculation. There was no real demand. So how is it different this time?
Incentive, I'm going to ask to keep that part. I'm not going to go deep into it. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be too happy if they hear me out, because I think let us wait from, there's going to be a budget speech in October. I heard there's going to be an exciting announcement. So let's wait for it. On the infrastructure side, I think what we are seeing now is not going to be an organic growth. It's a ramp up kind of a demand for electricity, for water and whatnot. So the challenge is we have this Rancangan Malaysia. Every 5 years you put in your request, your proposal to the federal government to build up all the infrastructure, because the grant from the federal government, And then for water, we have this separation of raw water and treated water. Treated water is regulated by SPAN, is a federal agency. Raw water is under states. So a bit of a complex kind of thing. So the infrastructure side, we need time to build it. At the same time, we need a grant from the federal government. Is a yearly basis. You need to put in the proposal. But what we need now is 5 or 10 or 15 years of planning. We need to build it now, just to make sure that with the signing of the special economic zone, we are ready to cater to the investment needs, to the investor needs. So we are working closely with the federal government, especially on the natural resource, building up the water. We know that water is something that very crucial, is very key fundamentals to any kind of developments. Also, we also have an existing obligation to our neighbor. So these are the things that kind of a challenge. It's a good problem to have, but we are discussion is ongoing, and we work closely with the federal government. Apart from that, we're also looking into kind of a digital infrastructure that we are putting in place. We are having quite a lot of this data center influx for the past 2 years. So this sector is already driving in all the technology, including all the manpower, the talents. So these are the things I think is a good problem to have again. At the same time, we do realistically knows where our challenge is, and we have a very good relationship with federal government. Yeah, the king is from Johor again. The stars are aligned.
I didn't say that.
Okay. So is an opportunity for us right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Natazha. So you heard that, right? 18 October. Make sure you tune in to the budget session then. So to Paul, maybe let's just move on to Paul for now. Your international clients have actually had plenty of choices when it comes to locating their data centers and logistics hubs, as we discussed just now. What are the assurances or expectations from your perspective, from a government standpoint, from a state standpoint, and maybe look at Invest Malaysia as the next, Iskandar Malaysia, sorry, as the next growing hub for high tech and the green sector? What are your thoughts on this?
As I mentioned before, continued support. I think that's massive, and there is a big focus globally on sustainability, and I think the industry is relatively slow moving when it comes to that, and a lot of that is because it's very much a growth industry, which is tough to regulate and make change whilst you're growing across the board. So whilst there's continue to be an appetite locally to encourage more growth in the sector and growth of innovation and rewards for that as well, I think that the organisations globally will continue to choose Johor and the Iskandar area as a place they'll need to come. I think when you also look at the way that the industry evolves, and you look at maybe the differences between, say, Kuala Lumpur and Johor and things like that, you're looking at different types of workloads. You're looking at different types of target audiences, if you will. And I think Johor, from that sense, becomes one of Asia Pacific's hubs for certain types of activities in the technology space. And that involves, obviously, when you see NVIDIA investing with YTL and relationships like that starting to form and to grow, I think that'll show that will continue to make it viable for a long time to come. And that's what you need. If you've got a Chinese focus in Johor, which you have, you're now starting to see a very heavy US involvement there as well. That's going to give you growth over the long period.
Right, thanks, Paul. So you just mentioned about a few things that I can bring on to the next question for Zul. So we hear about a few developments under the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone. We've heard about the QR code clearance, the special financial zone at Forest City, the Invest Malaysia that you mentioned about the facilities in Johor, and also the establishment of Talent Development Council. I think we've also been talking about a lot of things that data centers may not necessarily be the immediate economic multiplier effect, but a few other things that we've just discussed could actually bring a lot more to the economy. So these plannings have been keeping you busy, I'm sure, as part of the leading force of the working committee. Maybe you can spend some time with us and explain some of the deep dives into some of these developments that we've been talking about.
Okay, I think when you talk about the developments, it's also important that we understand the context of how these developments came about. So when we tried to develop the framework in terms of understanding the developments of the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, I think, without offending any of our Singaporean counterparts that may be in the audience, we made a very open and candid observation that we said that, guys, we are very sure when Singapore comes onto the discussion table, they are going to come prepared. They know what they want, they know what they want to address, and what are the opportunities that they are after. So Johor as a state and Malaysia as a country, we said, we must also be prepared. And I think traditionally that has been a weakness on our side. We go into these discussions without preparation or enough preparation, or without anticipating what are the requests on the other side so that we can then respond accordingly, or at least provide our own point of view in terms of what are those things. So when we said, what is it that we need to address? When we look at some of the reports, like SBF reports that 93% of the people that they surveyed within their members said, oh, we are ready to come to Johor, or we have at least 50% of our members are already in Johor. And when we talk about the value proposition of Johor to Singapore, it is the only state that provides that close proximity. And I think for data centers, that's the main reason why Johor, compared to the other locations being developed in Malaysia, is still going to be preferred because of that proximity to Singapore. Then the big question that we asked in the room was, then why aren't people flooding into Johor? A recent number showed that of one of the largest FDI contributors to Malaysia is Singapore. But if you look at the data, less than 20% of that number actually goes to Johor. 80% of the investments coming from Singapore actually go to KL, Penang, other parts of Malaysia. So why aren't they coming? So as a guiding principle for all these developments, one of the things that we set out is to understand what are those long-standing issues that we need to address so that people can't give an excuse that why aren't they choosing Johor? If it all makes sense for Singapore businesses and multinationals who are in Johor to expand into Johor, why can't they come? So 3 things that were identified. One was there's always that long-standing issue of the ease of movement, whether it is people, services, data, and things like that. So we need to address that. So when you look at a lot of the things that we've done, I think the most clear one was the development of the RTS that's coming up. We can share with you today that plans that are already being tabled include, beyond the RTS completion, we highlighted that stops in JB. But the special economic zone, the development clusters are all over Johor Bahru, all over Iskandar Puteri and the rest. Where is the last mile connection that's going to bring them over from the RTS into those locations and developments that we are all doing? So today, I think there's discussion with the federal government, with the Singapore side to say, let's not just look at the RTS and stop there. We have to look at the last mile connectivity to say that we need connection from the RTS to come into all these development areas. So that's one way that we're looking at it. Similarly, when you talked about the IMFC, we said that, okay, let's not look at it from what KL has done, because KL is the center of where all these government agencies are. So like it or not, yes, having them in one location creates that access for investors, and it also then expedites the process. But if we replicate that like for like in Johor, we're bound to actually not just not expedite, but we might end up slowing down the process. For example, what we're saying is, if we have MIDA sitting in the IMFC, and the person that you put in that place is an officer who reports to the MIDA Johor office, and Johor office needs clearance from MIDA HQ, then rather than just going to one, you now have 3 layers that you have to go through instead of one. So having it physically there alone does not make sense. So we said that let's integrate the process. And I think a lot of the efforts that you hear today regarding what the state government is doing, where the local councils are all going to also have representatives in the IMFC. The new investor journey philosophy that they are all working on, that's a very important factor. We told them that when you want to create best in class in terms of investor relations, first thing you got to do is you got to stop passing the buck around. So today, I think one of the innovations that the IMFC will introduce is a account manager concept where whoever comes into the location or into the IMFC, you will be assigned an account manager, and that person will walk you through all the processes you need to go through with federal agencies, state agencies, and so on, rather than a previous exercise of saying, okay, you call this person, you call that person, and then you're on your own, you know? And similarly, I think I have to give credit that, you know, one of the innovations is you're witnessing Cik Natazha speaking with us this afternoon. Because I think if you ask a very honest question, for those who have an experience over the last 10 years or more dealing with Johor, have you seen a Invest Johor CEO come to a panel in KL or anywhere else and say, I'm going to speak about what we're doing in Johor? So that again represents not just waiting for an agreement, but the change that the state and the federal government wants to invoke to say, we're going to beef up the machinery. We need to get our processes, our people competent enough in terms of what we're doing. And then the final one is, of course, the big question mark on talent. So talent is still a very big issue. It is something that we need to address because Johor, like it or not, our blessings of being close to Singapore is also our curse. You know, having hired people, then just because of the Forex, people go across. So ways of thinking of how do we innovate, how do we attract, how do we train, and how do we retain the talent in Johor are topics that are being discussed today within the Johor Talent Development Council. And I hope, you know, over time, we'll try to fill that up because it's not something that we can fix overnight.
I mean, the currency, as we all know, is obviously the main attraction. So we're now hoping that some of the Malaysians working in Singapore will actually come back and invest in Johor, especially buying properties, for example, as the wealth effect actually increases over the years. Now, going back into connectivity, right, and infrastructure, where we see Iskandar, Malaysia today, as well as Johor. Natazha, maybe you can help share this with the crowd. That what are the key infrastructure and connectivity challenges, you know, that we need to overcome to make Iskandar a high-tech and green hub? And why should investors trust that this time these issues can be addressed?
Thank you. Again, back to Iskandar Malaysia, the foundation set up, the solid base that we are going to build on. It has set some kind of a minimum requirement for us to elevate all the basic infrastructure. So in terms of connectivity, we have need no introduction. We have ports, we have the airports, we have the highway coming up, going to broaden from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. So all these are giving option or alternative to all these logistic provider. It gives a sense of that the federal government and the state government is doing it now. Again, because of the joint effort between Malaysia and Singapore, is going to be some kind of funding. I'm not supposed to share a lot, but these are the things that if the federal government, if the state government is committed to do it, we are opening, it's like we are opening a floodgates to all kind of investment. So we need to get ready with all the infrastructure in place. So we talk about connectivity, there'll be so much things to deliberate on, talking about in the digital infrastructure, logistic-wise, and everything else. So I think this is the right moment. Again, back to the regulatory side, because coming from the system, I can assure that it's going to be it's not going to be a business as usual for Johor. We did talk about regulatory and then being a regulator. Now the new thinking will be regulator, at the same time you'll be the facilitator. That's the way forward for doing business at Johor. So again, we are having some kind of a networking together with all the local council. supporting each other, making sure that they are subscribing to the same workflow, to the same process. We're trying to close the gap and making sure that whatever lesson learned that we have from the past, now we do realize what works and what didn't work. So it's a valuable lesson, and then we're very optimistic that it's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Natazha. Okay, there are a lot of questions on data centers, which I'm sure we'll address it with Paul, but there will be another session later where you can even go more deep dive. But just for this session at this point in time, so Paul, with global long-term investors often looking for stability and strong international partnerships when committing to large-scale projects, especially in cases like data centers, obviously the 3 hyperscalers and many others have been saying how much you're going to commit to Malaysia. What role do you see global partnerships play in the success of the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone? And in this instance, how can Iskandar and Malaysia ensure these partnerships are both robust and sustainable?
That's a really good question, and probably one that's quite relevant to myself and what we're doing in the region. Partnerships, when you go into any new country, are incredibly important. And that what they allow you to do is de-risk. What they allow you to do is have comfort moving forward. And in Johor and in Iskandar, it has a huge role to play. It's what we need as an organization, and what we need as an industry is comfort around things being able to be done well, quickly. Everything is time and money. And most of the time that comes down to the infrastructure services and just the ability to navigate the local landscape. And this is not something that's exclusive to a Southeast Asian country. It's not exclusive to Malaysia by any stretch. These things are prohibitive wherever you go. And a lot of the global companies and a lot of US companies in particular usually trip up when they come to Asia for the first time, and repeatedly as well, because it's not all the same. Culturally, it's different. Culturally, between Malaysia and Singapore is different. Malaysia and Indonesia is different. And to recognize that and to understand what those barriers to entry are because of that, it needs to be thought through. I think the previous panel on capital was a really interesting one. The one thing that every single investor globally who now control a lot of the data center space worry about is liquidity. And I think the Malaysian sovereign wealths are renowned globally for being some of the most progressive in terms of those opportunities, both domestically and abroad. And so I think those types of partnerships as well are incredibly important also. This is what's going into Johor, even though from a low-cost build environment and things like that, which is one of the advantageous reasons to go there. The technology investment of the workloads and things that will end up in those data centers is incredibly capital intensive. So again, partnership can be defined across many different realms and many different parts of the sector, but when you have a look at your supply chains, when you have a look at your acquisition cycles, when you have a look at procuring of infrastructure and all that sort of stuff, a lot of it comes back to time and money and the ability to be able to be efficient. And local partnerships are incredibly important for that.
Right. This is why we have these two gentlemen here to facilitate everything. And I know Natazha is here to make things happen. Right? Sure.
Can I add on a bit about data center Johor? For the past 2 years, Johor has already attracted more than 50. 20 is in operation in under construction. Another 30 is in the pipeline. I'm pretty sure future there'll be a lot of interested party coming up. But the thing is, sharing from state government point of view, as much as we welcome this kind of investment, we also a bit of a nervous because the consumption of the natural resource and the energy. So the challenge is how we balance this thing without prematurely announce that we don't want this. At the same time, we don't want to overdoing things. So now we are being more selective. If you heard about the special committee set up ad hoc, the first state that have this committee, Jawatan Kuasa Pembangunan Pusat Data. So basically, before your submission to the OEC, this committee chaired by one of the ESCO. So we are looking at, I'm giving you some kind of a heads up for future investor. we are looking at the PUE, power usage effectiveness, WUE, water usage effectiveness. The lower number is the better, because we have a scoring system. And then third one is the salary scale, what you're going to offer to the workforce. And number 4 is, I'm not mistaken, is job creation. How much job creation to the locals or to the Malaysian? So if you can come up with a good storyline, convince the committee, then you're good to go. So basically, Paul, that would be the thing that you're going to face after this, before the submission to the local authority. Because number 1, again, we don't want to overdoing things. We are looking at what is the best number for Johor. Singapore, for the past 10 years, now they have 70 over plus data center. For Johor, only for the past 2 years, we already attracted 50. Now, where do we stop? Do we stop at 80? Do we stop at 100? And how do we ratio the population to the DC kind of thing? So we're still exploring, and we are still studying this kind of method. But again, we welcome these investments, just that it needs to be guided by all those principles, the ESG, the efficiency, and then technology driven. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 questions from Slido because it was very relevant to what Natazha just said. One of them is obviously, how do we track supply and demand of data centers? I think we've kind of addressed that a while ago. Should we be concerned that advancements in technology are reducing the space needed for these data centers? That's one thing to address. Maybe Natazha can do that, followed by Paul. And the other question, which probably would be very relevant to both Natazha and Zul, is water reserves, because it's obviously something that's being needed for data centers for cooling and other forms of the processes. How would the state basically be able to cope with the demand of water and power by data centers? So maybe let's start with talking about the area for data centers. Maybe Natazha or Zul, we can start with that.
Maybe I'll take it from a more macro approach, which is one of the things that the planning that we looked for the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone is that when you look at what Natazha highlighted in the last 2 to 3 years, being able to attract the 20 over data centers into Johor, the position of the state and the stakeholders has been one that has been very reactive. That means we did not plan for it. They came, they saw, then they discussed, and then we started doing these data centers. And then we got to a point and we realized that, wait, this is not sustainable. That if we do it this way, this is going to cause us a problem. We already take note that there are certain developments within the state that when we look at the water reserves, the development of the plans for power regeneration and so on, that eventually we're going to reach a crunch if we go on this pace. So one of the things that for the JSSEZ, one of the principles that we set out is that we have to be able to understand where the natural resources are, where the concentration of the talent or the access to the talent can be had, and then we plan ahead to see which clusters are suitable for which areas. So, and the principle is the same for data centers as well. So trying to do this, one of the things that we have put ahead is there are 3 elements that the state government currently looks at. One is today, based on the economic sectors, where do we identify which clusters fit into which specific locations? The second is today with agencies like Plan Malaysia and so on, we have identified for each of the locations within the special economic zone, what are the developments that are currently planned, how much land is currently available, and what are the status of the natural resources that are being required for the future developments in those locations, so that whenever an investor comes, we know how to plan ahead, or at least point them to say, if you want to do this, this is a more suitable location to do it. And then the third element that we've put in place is how do we integrate the infrastructure development around these 2 elements, the promoted sectors and the clusters and the availability of the developments in those locations. So ring roads, highways, extension of railways, and so on, these are all being thought through, but being planned ahead so that this time we come prepared and investors also do not have to, be challenged by those things that are not ready whenever they want to come into Johor.
Maybe Natazha can address a bit more on the water issue, if you can, given that it is something that is a little bit of a scarcer resource within the state, and maybe you could just help address that. Because I think from Paul's point of view, he may be able to also give us the amount of water that's actually needed for a typical work of a data center before that.
Thank you. Water is more tricky, Paul, because electricity is much easier because it's a single entity. You burn more coal, you get electricity.
No coal. We're going green.
Okay, sorry. But the idea is you can produce either by RE, okay, I reword RE, or by coal. But water is something different. It's totally at the mercy of the God. Now, one, you have the raw water side, then you can treat it and distribute. There's no point of you upgrade your treatment facility without having enough yield of the raw water. So raw water, you have to impound big infrastructure. And to add on, it falls under state purview, whereas the treated water and distribution fall under federal purview. The regulator is the SPAN. And each state have their own water operator, either owned by private or by the government or by the state government. So all these make things more fun to work on. At the same time, State of Johor, we also have our own obligation as a legacy to supply to the neighbor. At the same time, the neighbor is also one of the partner for the coming out of the special economic zone. So you can see the whole thing, how it's going to fall into places. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Are we going to extend the lease? Are we going to increase the supply? Or is a joint effort with a caveat of extending the agreement? So everything is a work in progress. So that's why, hence why we need new kind of a thing with a guided principle by the ESG, effectiveness of using technology so that you can reduce the consumption of the water. So these are the things, if you have a good storyline, you have good technology, you have a good narrative, then we welcome this kind of a data center to Johor.
Thank you. Paul, when you decide to, let's say, invest or build a data center in Malaysia or through collaboration or partnerships, in your experience in negotiating with the state, especially for water, what has your experience been and what are the main challenges? What do you basically need to look at and to get comfort that, okay, I'm going to build a data center today, I know I'm going to get this water, it's not going to turn off the tap anytime soon?
No, that's a good point. And I don't know how many private companies have won debates with government over critical resources over the years. I think that's a tough one for us to try and do. I think that comes back to one of the obligations of the sector, and one of the opportunities here is to become more innovative. I think with the Singapore moratorium, what they tried to encourage to get out of the moratorium and release some sites was to show if you're really pressed to do things innovatively and with a lack of reliance on huge amounts of infrastructure and to be able to use alternative fuel supplies and things like that, then you simply can. So in the case of water, that's a really interesting one. Tropical climates, synonymous with your outside air intakes, are at the same temperature as what they are inside. So the use of air-cooled environments is a bit more tricky. It's a bit more arduous, but it's not impossible. Cooling's cooling. When it comes down to it, you can make a room cold in a number of different ways. Water has always just been the way to do it. The problem you have with what's going on in Johor and in a lot of other places like Cyberjaya here, for example, is simply the scale of which people are building at now. And those requirements for water are going skyward very, very quickly. And just to give you an idea, we have access to water currently. And just to give you some of the quantums involved, we have access to 3 to 4 million litres of water a day. Like 3 to 4 million litres of water, that's a lot of bathtubs, that's a lot of swimming pools on a daily basis. That seems like a lot. That's enough water for a full water-cooled system in a data center for around about 70 megawatt data center. Now, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, back in the good old days, a 70 megawatt data center was rather big. In this day and age, it's not that big. We're planning a campus with 6 buildings around about that size. So simply, we can't rely on water. So we have to be innovative. We have to look at ways to use different technologies to do it. And that's just the way of the world. You can't make more water. You can make more power. You can rely more on renewables and things like that. So it's just a bit of a trade-off as to what you need to do moving forward.
Right, thanks. I think there's just 5 minutes between us and lunch, so I'm going to close the session off now. But before we go off, I think we'd like to just summarize the key takeaways for this session and basically look at proposed actionable steps to make sure Iskandar Johor and Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone will be a success this time. So just to round it up, let's start with Paul then, just be blunt. What are the top 3 things that absolutely must happen that in your view would ensure Iskandar this time around will be successful?
Continue with innovation, stick to the plan because it appears to be working. So follow through on it is for sure. And I think that the motivation is there to do so. So I have no apprehension about not being a success.
Thank you, Paul. Natazha?
Business will not be usual for Johor moving forward, and speed and clarity will be the name of the game.
Wow, okay. And finally, Zul.
I think I'll leave you with that the time is now. Do reach out to the state government, the federal governments, if you have plans, you have initiatives, because everybody is trying to get also on board this ship. But I think where we are trying to come from is we're trying to make sure that, as what was pointed out, let's not miss this opportunity, let's not make mistakes that we did in the past, but we're learning from those mistakes. So the timing is now, grab this opportunity.
Thank you, panelists, for such insightful discussion. So today, we've explored a lot of immense potential of the special economic zone. So thank you, everyone. Let me not take you away from your lunch. I think we can proceed from here. Thank you very much.